welcome to What's the Data Point from Citizens Budget Commission and Gotham Gazette. This is Ben Max from Gotham Gazette.
Maria Doulis from the CBC.
And we have a little bit of a different episode this week. We are bringing another event coverage episode to you. So what you're going to hear after a little introduction from me and Maria is an event that was held by the Association for a Better New York discussing the city budget. And it included 4 panelists being moderated by the New York Times' David Goodman, and they included the New York City Budget Director, Melanie Hartzog, Carol Kellerman, the president of CBC, Preston Niblack, the Deputy Comptroller for Budget under Comptroller Scott Stringer, and LaTanya McKinney, the New York City Council Finance Director. So 4 major players in the New York City budget, very smart people involved in negotiations, and of course, Carol from CBC, the watchdog on the panel, along with, of course, Preston from the Comptroller's Office, who also oversees those negotiations and final products from the Mayor's Office and the City Council. So for today's data point,
$89.16 billion, the size of the adopted budget for fiscal year 2019. After adjusting for prepayments in prior years and other reserves and spending, the total value of spending in fiscal year 19 is $92 billion. And so what we'll hear in the discussion is about what kind of an increase that budget represents over last year, what the reserves are in that budget versus new spending that was added, and other discussions of the spending that was included.
Yeah, there's some interesting discussion among the panelists about different risks to the budget, if the spending is going too quickly, the levels of reserves, a few pretty important sort of flashpoints in budget discussions, NYCHA, health and hospitals, some of the sort of distressed authorities that the city budget also helps certainly either prop up or fund or help repair, the impact fares will have.
Yes, distressed authorities and distressed people, because
Yes.
there was also a big discussion at the end about homelessness and how much the city's spending on that, and whether the strategy has been effective or whether the strategy has essentially been to just keep throwing more money at the problem without changing course. But I think some of one of the most interesting threads of the discussion was really about how you think about the spending added to the budget, because the administration maintains that it's really investment. We're investment while we have the money. And I think CBC's point, which I think was bolstered a little bit by the controllers, by Preston especially at the end, has been, well, investments mean you get something at the end. And we're not really focused enough on the performance metrics to know exactly whether the investments we're making and how much we're spending on certain things are worth it. And the second point, of course, is then what's the balance between that spending and savings? And are the savings, sufficient? And lots of different points of view on the panel about that question.
I think that was one of the best questions from David, which is, do you want to put even more money aside so that the governor, the state legislature, even the federal government says, New York City's got this huge surplus, these big reserves, and the governor has already done that, right? And said they can afford to chip in more. Back when the city was distressed in the 70s and 80s, the state chipped in more. Now the city's doing really well, and the rest of the state isn't doing as well, so the city can chip in more for the MTA and put more money towards NYCHA and make up some costs if the state reduces funding for child welfare and things like that. So that was a very interesting part of the discussion. We won't spoil the answers to that question for you, but to your point, one of the most other interesting things, and everybody should listen all the way through because this is towards the end, is this question of performance metrics. This is obviously something CBC has been hitting a lot, is that the city doesn't show well enough the bang for the buck in services and programs.
Right, and there's a great Ben's right, listen through and listen to the distinction between the perspective of, we need to deliver services to people that they can feel and see in their communities, and there's a responsibility to make the budget work for people, which is absolutely right, versus, the other perspectives which say, yes, that's true, but if people knew what the cost of some of these services were, they would rethink what their priorities are between these services. So it's really important.